And welcome back to the Michigan Insider and on Ticket TV as well. This is the Michigan Insider, Sports Talk 1050, WTK The Ticket. We are online at WTK.com, and it's a Thursday. It's 9 o'clock hour. No Sam today. He is under the weather. He battled through it yesterday. He had a burning throat. He could barely talk. At least the pain was there, but he found a way to fight through the last couple of days. But yeah, that was the end of that. He's taken.
If I would have gotten the text message instead of 5 o'clock in the morning, but like maybe the day prior, I probably would have come in yesterday. But
yeah,
I 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting to sleep, dog.
I tried to explain that to him, but he gutted through it the best he could the last couple of days. Hopefully he'll be back tomorrow. I'm not super optimistic because, well, for that matter, the weather's not helping. Having smoke through the air and having the air quality not be so good is not going to help his cause. But we'll keep you posted on that. But in the meantime, it is time for the MGoBlog Roundtable. We said good morning to Brian Cook. Brian, how are you?
Hello.
And Seth Fisher. Good morning, Seth. How are you?
Ira, it's weird talking to you on that side of the window, man.
It is a little different. Usually, you just see my face through the screen as that box that says.
Yeah, usually you're in the control room, and Sam's like leaning all the way back in that chair. I don't know how that chair survives.
And then I wave by, and then you guys don't see me anymore. But instead, no, Sam is. Should have seen him yesterday. He was bundling up. He was getting a little chilly. He was like all bundled up, and it was a pretty wild thing to see. But we got a lot to get to here. The first thing I want to discuss with you guys is this phrase that we were talking about earlier. We were talking about it in the last segment, voluntary membership. I'm sure you guys have a lot of conversation about this. The memo that the NCAA sent out the other day to their members about that NCAA rules will supersede state law. Seth, this just seems to be like a failed argument to start, but isn't that like kind of the NCAA's MO? They have all kinds of arguments that they seem like they're going to lose, and they seem to.
If your legal argument is so bad that non-lawyers are like, "Ooh, you're not going to win that one," I understand that like they feel like they need to try something, but the state law pretty specifically calls them out to say you can't do this. So I don't know how much the NCAA wants to get into that fight, because what's going to happen is it's going to end up in court, and they're going to be on the side where you get punished if you do something wrong.
We talked about why does the NCAA want anything to go to court? The last time they went to court, they lost in a court that doesn't agree on, as we talked about it the other day. The Supreme Court does not agree on anything, right? Pretty much. There's no unanimous votes on the Supreme Court, pretty much on anything.
Well, they're protecting the golden cow.
But this 9-0 vote, like this is the one thing that they can all unify together, right? It's the same thing. States that have legislatures led by the Democrats and other states that have legislatures led by Republicans, they can all agree on NIL rules. These and NIL laws. These are the only things that we can all see.
Here's what they're facing right now. And the Texas law is far more, and I don't want to get super politics, but lowercase the word liberal than the other laws, right? That one says it goes way further than Michigan's law. It goes way further than Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, or might be leaving another one, Oklahoma, have passed laws recently. And you got Dooley on here yesterday, and he did a much better job of this stuff. But that's what's going on. Some of these states are just kind of trying to jump each other, right? Everyone wants to be the most liberalized version, because then their schools will have an advantage over others, and that's who's actually helped writing them. If you look at like who's writing these laws, right? They're going and talking to the coaches at Texas A&M, saying, "What can we do for you?" Right? And the NCAA, that's their problem, is that now they have members who are affecting public policy, and if they can take a shot and maybe scare some schools into not doing that, maybe that can. And I think that's what they're trying to do. I think they're not going to get anywhere legally against Texas. But my guess is what they're trying to do, and maybe Brian disagrees, is scare other schools into going to their legislatures and trying to have this, keep this going. Because what's going to end up happening is that the NCAA is going to get legislated out of existence because they're so hated right now.
It's a really interesting dynamic in all of this, because the New York one is the one that I found to be really fascinating, because the New York law is very specific. That basically, so I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the specific law in front of me, but I'm paraphrasing saying our law supersedes the NCAA, and if the NCAA tries to punish you, you're not going to get punished. That's essentially what they said. So maybe the memo was the NCAA, and this is all the NCAA's version of we I've been asking for legal help. We've been asking for congressional help. And if we at least force the issue, we may lose, but at least we'll get the help we're asking for. Otherwise, I don't see the point of the memo in the first place. It just seems like a losing battle.
Well, you've got a lot of people who have jobs that are getting obsolescent, right?
That's true.
So you have the job. You're like, I gotta do something to justify my existence. And so you get these things. And, if you find yourself in a similar situation, probably like, I gotta do something. But the realistic situation for the NCAA is like, it's over. You have the Texas A&M athletic director directly stating that we're ignoring this memo. They're just like, we're going to go with state law. And Ross Bjork was just like, nah, we're ignoring this. So at some point, I imagine the NCAA is going to try to come down on some school, and they're going to end up in court again, and they're probably going to lose again, and that's going to be it. And at this point, what should the NCAA be fighting for? They should be fighting for the fact that kids got to go to class, kids got to get degrees. Everything else, I don't think is palatable in the current environment. Everything else is also just, I think, kind of beside the point. Like, honestly, who cares if some kid is getting some cash on the side, or the Texas legislature passes the most aggressive NIL law in America? Like, I mean, what you see is that these NIL decisions don't really seem to be changing a whole lot of the landscape in college football. You had the Texas A&M recruiting class the first year, but that fell apart, right? Like, they went really aggressively into the NIL space to get all those 5 stars, and they ended up with a 5-7 season and a bunch of transfers. So I think that does demonstrate that there is more to it in the modern recruiting world than just throwing bags of cash at people. So I actually think that's encouraging, and I think that we're going to a place where, after the dust clears, that we're going to be in a spot that makes some sense. I wasn't quite sure of that when all this started, but at this point, yeah, I think it's in a pretty decent spot.
We're 2 years, Saturday with the 2-year anniversary of NIL coming into existence. I remember Miz and I were talking about this. There were a lot of alarmists. Oh, this is the end conversations from some people, basically like old traditionalists more than anything else, I think. And then, as you said, Brian, probably people that are trying to hold on to their jobs, that, this is the end, and people are going to hate it. They're going to stop watching. They're going to this, they're going to that. Well, TV numbers look really good, and the interest levels look really good. The social media engagement looks really good. All that kind of stuff seems like all the alarmist stuff was for naught. And I think, Brian, your point is we're 2 years in, and over the course of the next couple of years, it will shake out and kind of flatten out and level out into what it will look like for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, and you saw some teams kind of go more heavily into it earlier, but you're seeing teams like Michigan and Notre Dame, catch up. We've had some statements from both Ward Manuel and Jim Harbaugh of late describing what they want to do in the space, and it's like, yeah, we're going to do this, and we don't have issues with it. I mean, Ward continually says things like, yeah, I don't believe in pay for play and that kind of stuff, which is either tremendously naive or tremendously cynical. I can't figure out which one. But yeah, it's they have the collectives they've endorsed. They announced an initiative on their own. The state is moving to liberalize their NIL laws a little bit too. So it feels like whatever hangups or whatever Michigan had about this are fading over the course of time, and that most teams are going to end up in similar spots depending on the resources they have. And I think you're seeing something that Michigan is doing right now that's really smart, and that's like, how many kids are going to be in this recruiting class? It's going to be like 30. And they can do that now because NIL means that scholarship limits are very hypothetical. And so they can take 6 offensive linemen, and those offensive linemen, if it's 2 years from now, it looks like it's not working out for them, they can transfer if they want to, but they don't have to. They can transfer if they want to, and they won't have to sit out a year. So Michigan is taking an approach where it's like, okay, we're probably not going to be able to compete with the Georgias and the Alabamas to get 6 5-stars every year. But what we can do is we can take a bunch of guys who have the athletic profile that they could be really big successes. We're going to carry a roster of 100, maybe 110 that guys who are real scholarship players, and we're going to try to develop them, and the ones that develop are going to play, and the ones that aren't are going to move on probably. But again, they don't have to. If they don't want to, if they want to stay and become champions and all that stuff, they can do that. So Michigan is expanding their number of lottery tickets, which I think is a really good way to approach it for them. And
yeah, it changes your margin of error. It makes it wider.
Yeah.
I've used that phrase so often, where Michigan has a smaller margin of error than everybody else in recruiting based on different things. This does widen that. Just a total aside, you mentioned scholarship numbers kind of being almost arbitrary at this point with NIL. I was thinking the same thing, because I've heard you've said that exact thing multiple times, and I heard your voice saying it when I was reading the report about LSU's penalties and some reductions in scholarship. Like, LSU reduction in scholarship,
right?
They have all the money they want anyway. It doesn't matter.
That's not
scholarship. It's just some booster giving you the money anyway to pay for it. Who cares? It's just who's paying for the tuition now. It's not. It's different.
Yeah, and that's another another way that
please do that.
That's just another way in which the NCAA's ability to actually level any punishments has been curtailed. So it feels like right now, what's the only tool in the NCAA's toolbox? Well, it's a postseason ban, and they really don't want to do that. I mean, you'll see occasional one-season, postseason bans, but you are never going to see like an SMU-style death penalty again.
Never.
And the situation is just, even if you do get caught doing something bad, one, your state law probably says it's okay, and so you have a legal case, and two, the ability of the NCAA to do anything about it is extremely minimal. And they might be able to do something about individual actors. So Will Wade got a show cause and can't recruit now that he's at, I don't remember where he is. So there is some ability to tell people that, like, okay, your career is going to be damaged if this happens. But in terms of institutions, I think it's just really hard to make a case to enforce just about anything. So, people go into this and they're like, oh, we got to be careful about this because we have no idea what the NCAA is going to do. And the answer is nothing. The NCAA is going to do nothing. And so there is some benefit to being someone who's trying to actually do a good faith job of following rules. Like, that's not something that I want to dismiss out of hand. But if you're not that kind of institution, that's free
reign.
reign.
Come back to bite you. And by the way, Will Wade's at McNeese State now.
Yeah,
he's at McNeese State now. So we'll see over the next. This is the thing we talk about with Dooley, and I know, Seth, you've talked to him about it, and you're going to be on there on the Profession, the Profession, the Pundit soon, and you'll be talking more about this. He goes into class in his NIL class and he teaches them what happened like that week. And then he goes to the very next week and like that is like ancient history. And he's got like all new things to teach. It's amazing how we're like living through this history now. He's teaching in the moment and we talk about it in the moment. It is so rapidly changing and moving, just with his little things, big things, a memo, whatever it might be. It's a lot in the last weeks and months.
And he has to actually teach things that haven't happened yet. Because he's in the know and he's talking to everybody, so he knew Empower was going to happen. And for anyone who doesn't know what Empower is yet, that's Harbaugh's answer to the problem that we have all these different collectives going on. Right? There's the one where it's a charitable, and there's one where like it goes to all the teams, and there's one that goes to the football players themselves, and like there's all these different collectives that got formed because Michigan wasn't really in the business, and we started up quickly. Harbaugh is now being the face of this, he's going to go and he'll talk to the donors themselves and say, here's what this is, here's what this is, here's what this is. He's not taking their money, but he's kind of like the go-between instead of all of them competing against each other, which is streamlining Michigan's system, which is finally unlocking the major donors. And that's why Michigan's NIL system has, in the last month or so, actually vastly improved. Everybody is much happier, and it happened very quickly. They didn't think they were going to have the success as quickly as they did. Now, this had not been announced yet. This had not happened yet when I went to go talk to Dooley's class. And he's like, this is locked down. Seth, your media, do not say a word about this until it's out, right? And that's how he has to teach, because he's got a class. He's got to educate these students on what's going on. But it's happening so fast that he needs insider information to be taught in his class at a university on the subject, because it's changing that quickly. And, he has to hedge, and and I think Jimmy King was just in there recently talking about things that are again embargoed until that information comes out. So it's happening very rapidly, especially in Michigan, because we finally are getting going. I think I understand where Ward Manuel's at. The NCAA, when they wrote the rule, it was not like they sat down and figured out what they want NIL to look like and wrote a rule. They put something out quickly. And I think any attorney who's listening is just like, yeah, I know what it's like having to follow a law that the lawmakers did not think 2 seconds about. And then you're like responsible for, and they have to deal with the Michigan side too. And lawyers always want more time, right? Don't make me make a decision that's going to get us in trouble. And finally, Harbaugh said, I got to go. It's late June. I got, when football starts, I'm doing football. This is my opportunity to recruit. We got to get this going now. And that finally put pressure on Michigan to make a move. Now, the reason why you didn't see the same thing happening at other schools is because they've been in business since 2001. It's not like they had to take a new operation, they just had to bring the same operation above ground, and they were ready to go.
All right, guys. Obviously, this conversation is ever evolving. I'm sure we'll be having more conversations about this throughout the summer and into the fall, but we're going to move the conversation forward. One other, I guess, it is legislative related. As the state house passed the rule now that alcohol in stadiums on college campuses is coming sooner rather than later. Do you think that means it's coming sooner rather than later, alcohol sales to Michigan Stadium?
Probably, I guess. I mean, it's another revenue stream. I just remember I went to a Minnesota game and Minnesota had already legalized alcohol sales. And it was just like, I was on the aisle. It was bad because everybody was like going down to get a beer, and they're coming back to get a beer, and then they're going down to go to the bathroom, and they're coming back. And I was like, man, I hope Michigan Stadium never has alcohol sales. So if you're on the aisles, this is a bad thing for you.
Or if you're low in the bowl, like row 3, and you got to get back up to like row whatever 7, you go to the bathroom. That's a lot of stairs to get back up.
Well, like if you're in row 3, you have the personal choice to partake or not. But if you're on the aisle, you're just going to be like, oh, man, these guys with their Bud Lights. Come on.
I mean, I know that the security is way better today, but when I was in college, we didn't have any problem getting alcohol into the stadium. You brought in you filled your Coke with like 50% Captain and you're ready to go, and like that's what you had. Like, people have been and people tailgate all day, especially because games start later most of the time now. Like you still have some noon games left, but there's so many night games now. There's 3:30 games so often now, and people have all day to tailgate. So by the time they're in the stadium, it's not like the inebriation level, I think, is going to rise that much that you can buy an $18 beer at Michigan Stadium.
They actually say that selling alcohol in the stadium, even at $18 a beer, does curtail some of the binge drinking before the game, which actually is a health factor that is good for the fans, I guess, because you're not trying to slam those last 3 or 4 before you go in, because you can drink when you get in. Although at $18 a beer, maybe you're still slamming the last 3 or 4.
Listen,
go in.
And I know the guys in particular. There's a tailgate right near the edge where they take they slam a hot damn before they go in, and it's the worst idea of all. And all these people always say, I can't go to that tailgate anymore because they all slam a hot damn before you go inside. Yeah, that's not going to change, man. People are going to drink at tailgates. People are going to get their beers, but like the game is so long now that I know Brian's like, well, no, people are getting out of the aisles. You need something to do with these games, man. Like you have huge periods of time when there's just nothing going on. When you're playing Indiana, come on, like,
if you have a 4-minute TV break, it's probably enough time to go get a beer.
Yeah,
like it needs to get a hot dog or anything else.
This has never been an issue that big of a deal for me. Michigan fans, if it's a noon game and we're going to be nuts or we're going to be rowdy and whatever. It's not going to change things that dramatically.
No, I don't think it will either. I'm just curious I'm not sure you can get the infrastructure in place in 65 days. Maybe they can. We'll find out because we're 65 days away from the start of the football season. That's a lot of infrastructure to get in place. If not,
I imagine that the groundwork, sometimes like you need a certain piece to be done. Like, for example, like if you're waiting for the running backs article for Hail the Victors and like the writer just not sent it to you yet, you can lay out the pictures. You can get the roster on there right. You can like figure out, like you can put some Lorem Ipsum text in there and count exactly how many characters you need. So like, where to cut to. Like you can prepare, you can be ready to go when it comes down. So you're not just like, okay, now it's legal. Let's figure out how to put beer in the stadium.
A little bit of subtext there. All right, we're going to take a break. Speaking of Hail the Victors, the preview, we're actually going to talk about the magazine, the book on the other side of the break, because you did a roundtable. And the roundtable is not going to we'll say a lot of the roundtable is going to make it to the physical cutting room floor, not digital.
Yeah, you got to blame Dooley. Dooley is the main guy at fault. He's got 2 articles. He gave him 1 article. One article is normally 6 to 8 pages, at most 8 pages. We had to split it into 2, so now he's taking 14 pages, and that's why the roundtable is so short this year.
All right, we'll blame Dooley. All right, I'll make him buy me more drinks next time we're at Oscars or something. All right, we're going to talk about the book on the other side of the break as we continue with Brian and Seth here on the MGoBlog Roundtable on Sports Talk 1050 WTK. The ticket. We're here on the radio. So we got Otis, John. I hate drunks at the game, puking all over. Just stay at home, get very drunk and puke in your own recliner. Bowl games, people spilling drinks over other patrons. I actually had that experience at the Orange Bowl years and years and years ago. But I'll be honest that I'm not in the bowl anymore. So I'm in the press box. So I don't really know what it's like in the bowl, except in Indianapolis, not a problem. In the bowl games the last couple of years, it only got a problem after the score got out of hand or the game was annoying. But I never really experienced that. He was saying, and then he followed up on the other side of it. So many Michigan fans smoking weed before the game. Everyone smells like skunk going to the game. That might be possible.
That is not fair. No one's smoking skunk anymore. The quality has gone up dramatically from when I was in college.
I mean, they probably got some stuff that's called skunk, but you don't go for that stuff.
But you probably bought it for $40 in the middle of a spaceship.
Jacob, I went to the U of M IU game in 2021, the Fox night game, and that was the longest game ever. Beer inside would have hit peak revenue sales that night. There are some games that would definitely bring out the revenue for sure.
That was literally the game I was thinking of when we were talking about how these things are 4 hours long. Was that's what they're doing now, and the UNLV game is going to be at night this year. So, that means that there's going to be more time between plays, right? There's going to be longer commercial breaks for UNLV. That game's going to be 45-3 at the half.
Yeah.
Yeah. I go to baseball stadiums all over the country. Mm-hmm. And every baseball stadium sells beer.
That's where you should be drinking beer at games. That's like part of baseball.
Yeah, and baseball games are slow, right? And football games you didn't really need it before because it used to move faster. But that's where I'm coming from. Is that like if you're going to slow football down to the speed of a baseball game, then it just absolutely makes sense, and it's weird that we just haven't done it yet.
Yeah, my concern would be as a fan, if I'm too far from the bathroom, if I, once you once you break the seal.
You can also go to the game and not drink beer. I don't drink at the games. Like you can
I'm
do
not,
that.
right. I'm saying I'm not a big game day drinker when I'm not working, regardless. But
Uh-huh.
I'm not a big drinker regardless anyway. So I guess I'm not really the person to be having this conversation.
Yeah.
So I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. And not being in the bowl, I can't speak at games in general. I can't speak of what the in bowl experience is like anymore. So I might be down there for like a half a game here or there, like once a season, just to kind of hang out either with Sherry and Grace or whatnot. But otherwise, yeah, it's very difficult to speak on that. We're back on radio in about 90 seconds.
That is one of my favorite things about MGoBlog, by the way, is I can cover Michigan and not have to be in the press box.
If I didn't have a post-game show right after the game, I probably would not be in the press box either. But I can't do a post-game show without taking notes during the game. It would be impossible. And plus that, getting to the post-game venue, leaving from the bowl is not as easy as getting to the post-game, leaving from the stadium, from the press box, because I could beat everybody out of the bowl and get to my car. So little inside. But I miss it. I miss it a ton. Like, that's what I love about the last two, going down to the Sheldon in Atlanta. That was 10 years ago. And I had a couple drinks the night before the Final Four. It was not a work day. It was the night before the Final Four. And that is true, but still not a big drinker. But I've thoroughly enjoyed the Big Ten championship games, and not just because of the result, but because I can go and sit with my wife and sit with my family and go hang out, actually have that kind of experience at a game that I know. The game, the Big Ten championship game this year and the bowl game this year, it was the first time I had sat at a Michigan football game with my dad outside of beating Florida in Dallas in like 20 years or something.
I got a story. We can do it after the break because I know we're going to come back soon. But the reason that Michigan replay does not exist anymore, the reason Michigan replay went off air, is the exact thing we're talking about.
There you go. All right, guys, we are coming back on air in about 10 seconds. So I will count. No, I will not be counting you in. Miz will count me in. I'm so used to being over there. Stand by, everybody.
Back in radio, 5, 4, 3.
And we are back on the Michigan Insider here on Sports Talk 1050, WTK The Ticket, online at WTKA.com. So it's time to talk some Michigan football with Brian Cook and Seth Fisher. As we're going to have, essentially, Seth, this is kind of like the roundtable with the roundtable, because you have a roundtable in your book that's coming out. And there are 8 questions in the roundtable conversation. And unfortunately, a fair amount of that could get cut because Dooley is very long-winded, and we appreciate long-winded generally.
I want to make sure people understand Dooley's articles in this book are fantastic. He wrote
not a bad. He's full of good information.
So you know what this book is, right? Like the first half is preview. So we preview the team, we preview the opponents, and then the second half are features from like writers who write about Michigan. And I got John Crick in there, I got Scott Bell in there, I got Adam Schnepp talked to Jeremy Gallen in there, and then I asked Dooley to do something on NIL because he's teaching the class on NIL, and then he comes out with this story that's the first. He goes through the entire history of cheating in NCAA, which is not a short history, by the way. And then after talking about everyone who ever cheated in the NCAA, he moves on to like what's going on in NIL, which is also quite a complicated subject. And then had to keep on adding things. He's like, "Oh, this happened too," and then like, "Okay, now we can talk about the Empower program." So like it just kind of growing and growing, and all of a sudden he had 2 articles, and so we split them up. But when that happens to me, the roundtable started. The back of the book. That's like that started because I think in 2008 we just needed to fill some space at the end, and just like that article is great because it can be 3 pages, it can be 8 pages, it can be 11 pages, whatever you need it to be. If you're laying out the book, depending on where things come in and where and how long the features are, that can kind of make you good wherever you're at. And this year it's just very short because the content was too good. So.
This is a good problem to have. And I say this every year. The thing that I love about the book, because the first part of it, you talk about the team preview, a lot of that for me, just because I live this just like you guys do, a lot of that is regurgitating information to me. I'll still read through it, but a lot of it is stuff that I already know. But you get to the second half of that book, and even if I can't get to a lot of that before the season starts, because I'm whatever the reasons are, if I pick that up during like the bye week, that's just all evergreen. right? There's some of your articles in the book from like 5 years ago is still really relevant. There's some like the historical stuff is very evergreen.
Yeah.
Those are really fun to pick back up and read. I love the second half of the book. And so if that means that your roundtable conversation's a little bit shorter, so be it, because that means I have some extra bonus reading that I'm going to really enjoy when I'm at the beach this summer.
We have other outlets for getting information out when we want to.
There's the internet, right? There's a thing that doesn't cut.
Yeah.
When you tell the writer that he has
I think
24
I'm going to do a
inches and he
Kindle
writes
edition of
30.
the book
Yeah,
too
so.
this year. So if you want to get it on Kindle, you can you'll be able to read the whole
You
thing.
get the full version on Kindle.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So here are I want to read through the questions and we're going to have a little conversation on some of these roundtable questions. We'll call it kind of the roundtable on the roundtable. And because I have not answered these questions and I'm not
We'll
part of
workshop that title there, Ira.
What's that?
We'll workshop the title.
Yeah, it's for now. We can work on that. Brainstorming. But the first question, I love this question because I use these numbers in conversations with people all the time because it just shuts them up. But 42 to 27 and 45 to 23, how sustainable is this? That is the question. It's actually a great question. How sustainable is it? At least for one more year, right, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this on this podcast before that, it seems like Michigan has a little bit of advantage right now just in the meta game because so much of Ohio State's recruiting proficiency is locked into one position, which is a wide receiver. And Michigan is running an NFL defense that does a much better job of combating that kind of offense. 23 and 27 points for Ohio State is doing work against those guys the last 2 years. And it doesn't really seem like Michigan is going to have a talent drop off. Certainly everybody's like, well, you couldn't do much. And they couldn't do much because Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo were just wrecking everything 2 years ago. And then Michigan has a sack by committee approach the next year. And there's not really a drop off in their performance. So, it feels like even though they changed defensive coordinators a year ago, that there was continuity there because it's just like we're going to run the Raven stuff. And then on the other side of the ball, Jim Knowles is a Big 12 defensive coordinator for the most part, who only had success in his career running a 3-safety approach in the Big 12. And so he seems like maybe not the best choice to go after a Michigan team that runs the ball pretty much more than anyone other than the Service Academy, at least last year. And didn't really seem to have a good answer for defending that except get really aggressive and open up big plays the other way. So, yeah, I feel like on some level it is sustainable. On another level, you're probably not going to beat Ohio State by 3 scores consistently. Just not something.
We're getting better every year, so we're going to have but yeah, like here's what I noticed, and this kind of dovetails on what Brian was saying. 42-27. After that game, the NFL draft, Ohio State has 1 defensive player drafted. 45-23. After that draft, Ohio State has 1 defensive player drafted. Now, Ohio State's recruiting like Georgia and Alabama, or at least they're supposed to be. But they're losing the defensive recruits to Georgia and Alabama, except for a few cases. They got JT Tuimoloau, who's amazing, and he's going to be great. And they got a few other dudes who are out there, but they're also not getting the best out of them, right? They have a 5-star safety that they wanted instead of Rod Moore, and that guy was probably responsible for like 3 or 4 touchdowns against Michigan and a couple of the big plays besides. So they're not developing their talent very well right now. And when you look back, what happened to Michigan in 2018, 2019, the fundamental problem they had was they didn't have the talent to stick with them, right? They got beat by the crossing routes because Brandon Watson was not going to be able to play the way that Michigan played, and Michigan would have to do something that they don't normally do in order to solve that. 2019 comes around, Michigan does not have the defensive tackles. Ohio State uses duo all day, they push them off the ball, and that was the problem Ohio State had the last 2 years. When you look at the fundamental issue between those two teams, Ohio State could not defend Michigan's main rushing attack. Michigan has Zinter and Olu. They can pry guys open, and Taron Vinston, who was a very high recruit, is not looking like he's going to be a first-round draft pick. And they used to have those guys. They used to have those tackles. They're going to get them again. So sustainability long-term, Ohio State's going to be able to recruit good players. If they can't get the coaches, they'll get better coaches. But That's what's been going on lately. Michigan had a fundamental advantage in the trenches in their running game, their main running game. The main thing that they wanted to do was going to beat the main thing Ohio State wanted to do. And the main thing Ohio State wants to do, Michigan is probably one of the best teams in college football defending it, because they focus on they defend it the same way that the NFL defends it. And if you look at what the Ravens do every year, you're a Ravens fan, they beat teams that have bad or young quarterbacks to a pulp. And then like they go against like Drew Brees and they get sliced up, because that's what you need in order to beat the system that Michigan runs. You need someone who knows all the tricks, figures out exactly who's in the wrong spot, and finds it. Well, CJ Stroud's not that guy. Most college quarterbacks are not going to be that guy. If Ohio State gets that guy, they're gonna shred. So I think Michigan has gotten themselves back to what they should be, which is competitive with Ohio State long term. Short term, Ohio State has not fixed the same problem that caused 42-27 and 45-23.
Real quick aside before we get back to you guys' questions, Michigan was reported they're doing now a beat Georgia drill along with the beat Ohio drill. Does that do anything to you guys? Does it bring a?
They probably renamed the drill. Honestly, like you could, they're focused on they're telling you that they're focused on a national championship, not just a Big Ten championship. Whatever. This is for the fans who are not looking at deep dives.
I just hope it's air conditioning sabotage. Their beat Georgia drill is just like, all right, here's the wires you got to cut to make sure that the air conditioning doesn't work, and everybody is just too tired to do anything. That's my
or
thought.
Maybe the AC goes the other way, and it makes it feel like they're playing in Michigan in November, which they've
go
the other side on that. So here's a philosophical question. Can we answer this one? What's a Sharon Moore sans Weiss offense look like? Can he keep all his weapons fed?
I think it looks. Sharon Moore is going to call the plays. Philosophically, this is still a Jim Harbaugh offense, right? Like Michigan, I think there's a Twitter guy called Stats of War who's a TCU guy, and he released a bunch of stats, and one of them is run rate over expected. And I think Michigan was about 117th in that, which means their run rate over expected was huge. And I don't think that's going to change that much. You have a second-year quarterback in J.J. McCarthy, so they're probably going to be more comfortable opening up a little bit. But, you got Blake Corum. You got Donovan Edwards. This is not going to seem that different. I mean, one thing that has become clear over the past few months is that Weiss had the third down and red zone play call.
Yeah.
And we've been complaining about the red zone play calling for a while. So, I don't know. We have a lot of reports that, Weiss wasn't really up with, Underwood, and his exit with the computer crimes thing is just like, I don't know about that guy. So I'm hoping that Sharon, who everybody loves and has done a really good job, will be an upgrade there. But it's tough to be a full-time offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach. If he can pull it off, well, he'll be a head coach somewhere pretty soon.
Well, isn't that when Jim says he's got at least four assistant coaches on his staff, but right now he thinks he'll be head coaches next year, which is a lot of turnover to replace. But I assume Sharon's one of those guys that he's.
I'm certain Sharon Moore's got to be at the top of that list.
Sharon Moore is like the only guy on that list. Like in terms of guys who might be a head coach somewhere next year, there's nobody else.
Jesse Minter got looks last year, and he'll get looks again this year, most likely.
Yeah, it seems like it's like probably a year or two early.
And then the guy that gets dinged for his name, but Jay Harbaugh has been phenomenal on the staff, and he should be a head coach. I know.
Guys are giving away our secrets.
It's just tough because you don't see guys go from position coaching jobs to head coaches.
But he's got his uncle's resume. He's a special teams coordinator, and his uncle went from special teams coordinator to NFL head coach. So it has been done, because they always say special teams coaches are the one coaches on the team that work with everybody, and it gives you that rapport with everybody and allows you to know how to work with everybody, whatever that means. But he'd be on that list too if I was making that list.
I mean, I could see some guys in this list being. I could see guys where we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Like the question about next year's offense, Moore is an offensive line coach. He was an offensive lineman, and we've seen offensive linemen be the offensive coordinator at Michigan plenty of times. It's pretty much what we've been seeing at Michigan. Okay, so even if even if we didn't have Jim Harbaugh, and philosophically it's going to be Jim Harbaugh, if you're wondering like, is it different from last year? Probably not that different from last year. The main things I would say is don't expect as much wide receiver action. Not to say it's last year there wasn't a whole lot of, but if you're expecting like, okay, now we're really going to open up with the wide receivers, probably going to be more like opening it up with the tight ends. I think that a lot of what they're looking at this year, and this is the smart thing to do if you're looking at Michigan's roster, is how do I get my tight end Colston Loveland matched against a linebacker, and how do I get my second running back Donovan Edwards matched against a linebacker? Nobody has developed a defensive system today that can handle both of those problems if you have a running back and a tight end on the field as well as those guys. So I think you're going to see some Donovan Edwards in the slot so they can bring him around and use him as an extra threat. And I think that you're going to see two tight ends a lot of times, because two tight ends is the way that you get matchups for your good tight end.
I also think that if there are subtle tweaks that are different, right? Because I think you guys are right. It's still Jim Harbaugh's offense, but Sharon's running the offense. I think having JJ healthy this offseason and your starting quarterback, right? Like those two things alone, doesn't that make just that everything should look a little, if nothing else, what does the Sharon Moore offense look like? It looks like last year's, but smoother, right? Like with the experience, and it's not about even Sharon, it's about JJ. There's no question who your starting quarterback is, and it's not JJ overcoming a shoulder injury in the offseason. He's just leading his team throughout the entire offseason too.
Well, I hope Moore realized, because Moore was the only one last year who called a flea flicker. So maybe now that he's in charge of more downs,
flea flickers every game.
We're going to see more of those.
Flea flickers every game. Isn't that what we've been campaigning for?
I mean, it's not a lie. Like you saw how wide open it was when they ran against TCU. They should have come back and run at the next play because TCU wasn't reacting to it.
All right, now you're stealing my take.
Well,
it's not even a take anymore. It's just fact.
It's Brian's take that we have echoed many times on the roundtable and beyond because we agree with it. And when you have good points, we like to agree with them. And we give you guys your credit. Well, amount of times we say, as the guys in the roundtable said, or as John Bacon said, or as Steve Clark said. All right, third question in your roundtable was face your fears. What could derail this season? Maybe we don't want to answer this question.
Other than that.
Fine. Other than that, and we all know what that is. So outside of the obvious, all right. So what could derail a season?
It was the obvious an injury to JJ McCarthy.
That's that.
Yeah. Aside from that, I think you're looking at. I mean, it's really hard to come up with something. Like they pulled in transfers at all the spots where it was like, I don't know about that. I mean. Yeah, they have depth at pretty much every position. You can't say like, okay, if this guy goes down, except a quarterback and probably cornerback. Like Will Johnson is irreplaceable. So, but you have Rod Moore coming back for what's basically a contract year for him. He'll be aiming for the draft. You have Will Johnson, who's probably going to be one of the best corners in the country. If Saner's still back, that secondary looks good. And like they brought in the UMass transfer to kind of shore up the floor of the second cornerback spot. I mean, I guess you could say like, what if the linebackers don't progress? But even if they don't progress, I mean, they're fine. Like the defensive
Chris Partridge
tackle
is here. I mean,
and TP is going to have the linebackers ready to go.
I was thinking about this when I was doing the linebacker section. Is that like the last we've had unrealistic linebacker expectations. I've been really hard on Junior Colson. And I'm like, where did these expectations come from? Because if I look back, I didn't have these expectations, in the early 2010s or something. I thought that like a linebacker graded out in the mids was like, okay. And then Devin Bush came along. And then we also saw how Josh Ross played right after him. And he had and Devin Gill was actually grading out really positively back then. And then Ben Gedeon was a really good linebacker too. And so we had this like reset of expectations for linebacker that we had to kind of get rid of. Well, who was coaching all those guys? It was Chris Partridge.
I remember Devin Gill being a guy who was not grading out well, and was a personal favorite of Don Brown because he was a really good guy. But other than that,
that was Bolden. I thought Gill was grading out
no,
okay.
Bolden
Yeah.
was the guy who showed up every spring and looked amazing.
Right.
And then when the fall rolled around and he had to play offenses that he didn't know their playbook back and forth, he had issues. But in any case, yeah, I mean, the defensive line situation seems pretty great. Like they lose Mozzie Smith, that's fine, but people are talking about Jenkins as a potential first-round pick, and then you have probably a second-year blow-up from both Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. You got Rayshon Benny, so you're 4 deep there. And then they brought in Josiah Stewart on the edge. They brought in a bunch of offensive line transfers. Like, I think the most plausible, like, this team isn't as good as we expected it to be, is like Ladarius Henderson is the left tackle, but there's a reason he was playing guard at Arizona State, and the pass protection is just iffy. But even that, it's like, all right, I mean, you have Nugent, who's going to get the line calls mostly right, I assume. You have 2 all Big Ten guards returning. You have 2 different guys who played right tackle last year and weren't overwhelmed. Like, it's just hard to, like, come up with the
Yeah, mine was the offensive play calling. I don't want to like target Sharon Moore, but that guy's got a lot on his plate. He's not like and here's what Michigan's got. They're not going to be running the quarterback as much as they should because they want to get JJ McCarthy. Getting him healthy is like to the games that matter, and the games that matter are all like after mid-November. So that's the main thing that they're going to be focused on, and you're not going to. They're going to play their games, but they're going to grind it out. They're not going to really let him kind of lose the ball because you just don't want to lose that guy, especially. You don't really want to. You don't want to find out if Ladarius Henderson can't pass block that much, right? Like you can see it after a couple plays, but you don't really want to like get a huge a sample size on that one, right?
We want to spend most of September and October with JJ, Blake, and Donovan not seeing the field in the second half.
Yeah, we want to see some more G's, all right? Like that. Oh, God.
You just went full Robert Griffin.
I just went full Robert.
Never go full Robert Griffin.
Calling for orgy in the end zone?
That's the horniest man I've ever contemplated.
I have to, this question, Seth, when you sent me the questions, this question is way more fun to answer this year than say like it would have been 2 years ago. Much more fun because this would have been a really long answer from a couple of years ago. Like what would keep you from being competitive in your season? So I much prefer answering this question this year, because this team does look like they are set to give us another really fun fall. Really only have time probably for one more of these 8 questions, so we can save the rest of them for next week. But I want to get to this last one because it kind of ties back to how we started. And Seth, I don't know how you could ask this question in a print publication because by the time you print it, it's got to be different answers. But the 4th question is Michigan competitive in NIL? Are they trying to be?
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to be. And I think that they have some preconceived notions about what is good and moral that I think are incorrect. Just from Ward Manual's statements, but they're definitely in the game. Like they've announced I forget what it's called.
Empower?
They've announced the Empower thing. Like I think their recruiting this year is evidence enough that while they're probably not slinging around bags like Texas A&M, there's definitely an element there where they're not shying away from it. And if you can leverage your brand into some cash, they're not going to shy away from that. I do think the Hunter Dickinson transfer kind of indicates that Michigan is not fully weaponized here, but that's probably going to take some time. They're going to dip their toes in before they go full bore, but I think that's coming. And I think particularly in football, they've turned the corner.
I think there's a difference, and I've been saying this all along, between NIL and quote NIL. And Michigan in NIL is actually killing it. There was a report that Dooley mentioned to me that Michigan's actually sold way more T-shirts than anybody else, like the player T-shirts, like that kind of stuff we're actually doing really well on, and because they were coming at it from a new perspective, because Michigan did not have a pay the players operation. I'm sure things were going on, but there was nothing quasi-formalized like it was at most schools, like Notre Dame had, like Ohio State had, like Georgia and Alabama had. They had systems in place. Well, because they already had systems in place, I don't think they were addressing the actual NIL side from the way the Michigan was addressing it, which is, let's really see how much we can sell, right? Like Michigan's business side is doing really well. The using NIL to drive your what used to be cheating through, Michigan is still way behind. And I think that's what we're talking about. And we're trying to do it with Empower. We're going to try to, and that's going to get the donors to redirect some of their funds to things that are just making sure that if you go to Michigan, you're going to get paid the same as other guys. I don't think that the NIL stuff is really the big part of this. I think the quote NIL stuff is the big part of it. And again, Michigan needs to get over themselves and just say this is what business we're in, because the Big Ten's contract is way larger than the NHL's contract. And the NHL they have half as many players to take care of, but the average player there makes $3.5 million a year. And the average Big Ten player makes way less than that, even when you account the education and all the food and all the training and everything he's getting. So there's still a long way to go before this market shakes out. And Michigan is going to have to be, on the forefront of this, because it's not done moving.
All right, we're going to get back to this conversation with you guys next week and beyond. But real quick before we go, Brian, I have one Michigan hockey question for you. The number 3 pick of the draft last night, Adam Fantilli to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Does he follow in the footsteps of Zach Werenski and Kent Johnson and come back to Michigan for a sophomore year?
I don't know. I think that was much more certain if Anaheim went with him, because they have top 2 centers right now who are pretty locked in, and they weren't looking to compete next year. I think Columbus is making moves where it's like, we could do something next year. There's always the thought that if you sign a guy right out of college, you're losing his age 27 year to free agency. I think it's more likely that he goes at this point than comes back, which is unfortunate, because I thought Anaheim was a great landing spot for getting it back for a second year. So if I had to say, I'd say he's out the door.
All right. Well, don't listen to Brian's Adam. Don't listen to Brian. Come back. Guys, appreciate your time as always. Great roundtable with Seth and Brian. We'll get back to them next week. We'll get back to, hopefully Sam is back and better, feeling better tomorrow. We'll let you know. Thanks to everybody for listening to the Michigan Insider. And thanks to Miz, my guy on the other side of the glass, as always. Thanks to everybody for listening. This has been the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA Ann Arbor.